A story a day,
An
Jalas.
extract from Through My African Eye.
That's right.
A story and a book by Jeff Ngoima Mwaura Koinange.
Available at your local bookstore.
Go and grab a copy and read this extract. Where are you going to now?
I keep telling you, Jalas, and I have to remind you and listeners who are listening for the first time, I've been to 47
countries in Africa.
Yes, it's
out
like
of 54.
Out of 54.
And the most countries that you've not gone to are mainly at the north
Correct,
end.
in the Sahel.
That is straight up in Egypt, where you were just passing by.
Correct.
You just had a transit.
Transit.
Jeff on transit.
Correct.
Then there's Tunisia at the end.
No, I've been to Tunis.
You've been to Tunisia?
Yeah, next to Egypt is Libya.
Libya. You've not been to Gaddafi's land. You did not
Can
go
you
to
imagine?
How?
Can you imagine?
Shame.
Yes, Jalas.
Shame.
Next door, Algeria.
So a lot of Arabic countries you didn't
Correct.
visit. And also, unfortunately, you've not been to Madagascar.
Imagine.
And also not been to Seychelles.
Seychelles. Imagine.
You've been to Comoros, though.
Comoros, yes, and Réunion.
Réunion. So
But
where are we going to?
One of the most interesting countries I ever visited, Jalas, and which has a rich and incredibly sad and tragic history.
A rich, incredibly
Sad and tragic history
Hey.
is Liberia.
Okay.
Did you know that only 2 countries in Africa were not colonized?
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia is one of them, correct?
That one I can remember from my GHC.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
What was GHC?
GHC, Geography, History and Civics.
Oh, right.
Where Haile Selassie. Was it Haile Selassie?
Yes, Haile Selassie.
Gabriel, is it Gabriel Haile Selassie?
No, it was Haile Selassie. It was it was Rastafari.
Yeah, one of those things.
Rastafari, Haile Selassie.
One of those things. They were never colonized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one is Liberia. And I'll tell you why. So when slavery was abolished in America, early 1800s, in America and the world, completely abolished, right? But obviously carried on for another 100 years or so. But there were slaves in America who were agitating to go back to Africa, right? So they made so much noise under a certain society, it's called the CMS, Church Missionary Society, right? That the president then of America, called James Monroe, decided this, let's do this. Let's send all those freed slaves who want to go back to Africa. 1822, the first batch arrived right off the west coast of Africa. They settled in this land and they named it Liberia. The capital was in honor of the U.S. President James Monroe. They called it Monrovia. Are we together?
So the capital city of Liberia
is
Monrovia.
After
the President of the United States
at the time,
Monroe,
James Monroe,
who accepted that all the freed slaves
can go back to Africa.
Wow.
Here was the problem. These freed slaves who had been in America for generations, or probably, a couple of generations or more, they started doing to the locals what had been done to them in America. Lording over them, ruling over them, subjugating them. And the locals were known as Mandingos. And the newcomers were known as Americo-Liberians. So these blacks who have come from America are now taking over
from the Mandingos.
And they are ruling over
the Mandingos.
Subjugating them.
These are Americanos.
Yes. 1847, this is 25 years after the blinded. 1847, they create this country officially now. Liberia with the capital Monrovia, 1847. Their flag was very much like America. Stars, one star and stripes, red and white stripes, right? They called it the Lone Star State. Just like Texas. By the way, Texas is known as the Lone Star State, right? Liberia, one Lone Star. Like the football team, they're known as the Lone Stars. That's their star. And the seal under the star, under the flag says, the love of liberty brought us here to Liberia. For the next 133 years, I said 1847, right? For the next 133 years, they were ruled by one Americo-Liberian after another. No Mandingo ever ascended to power. Never allowed. So they had names like Talbot and Tubman and Smith and this and that. From
Africa too.
Yes, from 1847 to 1980. But by the way, in the 60s and 70s, when we were just becoming independent and coming of our own, Liberia was the place most African countries went. Most African elites went on holiday. Instead of Dubai, Munenda, Sikuizi, Bali, or wherever, everybody went and hung out on the beaches of Monrovia. Beautiful, well-built, infrastructure, everything was fantastic. Right? Until one day, in April 1980, a very junior officer known as Master Sergeant Samuel Canyon Doe decided, you know what? Enough.
I'm done with
subjugation. I'm a Mandingo, it is time. In those days, security was very lax, right? He literally walked into the executive mansion where president was sleeping, put a gun in his head, and pulled the trigger.
Killed him.
Tubman. Killed him right there. Then announces that he has taken over. Master Sergeant Samuel Doe. 1980, March. By the way, Liberia had retained very close ties to America all that time, right? Liberia had one of the longest runways in Africa for their national airline. You know why? Because it is said, had one of the NASA shuttles, NASA as in space, not the party, yeah? Had one of the NASA shuttles veered off course when it was on its way to the moon or wherever, and just happened to be somewhere above Africa, Liberia is where it would land. So the runway was about 3.5 miles long. The longest runways. Liberia was the largest CIA listening post in Africa. Those were the days of the Cold War, right? Between America and the USSR. So Liberia was the listening post. They could listen to everything that was happening on the continent from Liberia. So Doe takes over. The country is now in disarray after 133 years.
Keep listening. Keep listening. Till it is, take us to the hour. We will come back.
The Hot Breakfast with Jeff and Jelano.